Hi there, everyone, and welcome back to the
BumbleKast. I'm your host, Kyle Kraus, and joining me, as always, is the innocent bystander to my hostile takeover, Ian Flynn. How you doing, Ian? How you doing, Ian?
I'm doing okay. How are you, Kyle?
Not too bad. Things seem a little weird this episode, but that's okay. I think we'll make our way through it.
It's a little off, but whatever. Roll with it.
Yeah, sure. What have you been up to for the last couple weeks?
I have been working. Just wrapped up Fan Expo, which was a fantastic show, and had a lot of projects kind of fall into my lap. Had a lot of stuff that's moving forward, none of which I can talk about.
Of course not.
And I've started to try to use my Twitter channel in a way that's a little more structured. Use certain days to promote other things, promote certain individuals, and just actually make the Twitter channel actually worth something other than the occasional thing that I use. So, lots of positivity, lots of moving forward, lots of trying to get my act together. Woo-woo! How about you?
Well, I have also been working, and it's also something I can't really talk about, but it's not anything fun.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry. I can't really say anything. It's day job stuff, you know how it goes.
This ties into that hostile takeover thing.
Right. I just really haven't had I just haven't had the chance to really do much of anything. It's, overtime is starting to crank up at the old day job, the old factory, so time is getting to be a bit limited, and will probably be more limited as the months go on here, so unfortunately, just haven't had much time to do much of anything exciting, so, but
you got a little bit of a nest egg building, positive thinking?
Sure. Yeah. We have we do a raffle here on the BumbleKast. We give away comic books to people. And we have a winner for the latest raffle. And that winner is...
Fancy Fool!
That's right. That fool is so fancy. And they won a comic. Congratulations!
We will be contacting you over Patreon to see where you want us to send that signed book. So, Be on the lookout.
Yes, and don't forget, you can also enter into the raffle giveaway by emailing us at BumbleKast@yahoo.com, or by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/BumbleKast.
Patrons are entered into every raffle automatically. Everyone else needs to enter in per episode.
Indeed. All right. Are we ready to get into our main topic?
I think you are definitely ready. You've been itching to do this one for a while now.
Yes, indeed. Of course, I'm a huge fan of this series, and it really means a lot to me personally. And it's related to kind of what you do, Ian. You know, you work for Sega, you do some work for Sega. And I'm, of course, talking about Daytona.
Daytona!
Let's go away! Yes, indeed. It's time, finally time, for the Daytona episode of the BumbleKast. So, Ian, what are your thoughts on the Daytona series as a whole?
I haven't really ever played the Daytona series because I am just excruciatingly bad at real racing games.
It's not real at all.
Realer than, like, say, your Mario Karts or your Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing. If I don't have something to shoot at somebody else, if I can't, like, snake drift in unrealistic fashions, I'm useless.
The latter is true of Daytona. Daytona is very much... the physics are not in any way realistic. It's very much a drift-happy game. There, unfortunately, are no weapons, so you can't shoot anything at people. So, yeah, that's what's lacking. But Daytona is very much an arcade series. It is a very vague representation of actual stock car racing. But it's a pretty fascinating series. It is it might be the most highest grossing arcade game of all time, the original Daytona, which is pretty amazing when you think about it.
That is no small feat.
No. And the fact that it was just so ubiquitous in arcades in the early 90s, and you could still find a lot of them out there, just speaks volumes of how influential the game really was.
Now, did the Daytona series have the cabinets that could all link together so you were racing multiple real people at the same time?
Oh yeah, that was one of the big draws of it, actually. And that's something I'm going to get into, because I'm gonna give kind of a rundown of the series as a whole, give my thoughts on it, on each of the different versions of it that are out there, and talk a little bit about the development of it and some of the other appearances and references that Daytona has had throughout the years.
So we're going under the hood for this exhaustive coverage of the Daytona series.
Yes, indeed.
And why it really drives you as a passionate fan.
Yes, indeed. Now, the story of Virtua Racing really starts with Sega AM2. Sega AM2 is a developer division of Sega, or was. I don't think they're technically around anymore, which makes me very sad.
They did some really impressive stuff.
Yeah. AM2 was responsible for games like Outrun, Afterburner, Super Hang-On and the original Hang-On, Dynamite Ducks, which I think is where Bean the Dynamite Duck is from.
He is an homage to old Ben and Pin.
Indeed. And a whole bunch of other games. And one of their earlier games, and their first game with fully 3D rendered graphics, was a game called Virtua Racing. Virtua Racing came out in 1991 using the Model 1 arcade hardware, and is sort of the precursor to Daytona USA. It codified the gameplay features and pretty much influenced just about every racing game that came afterwards. Virtua Racing was notable mainly, other than being one of the first racing games to have 3D rendered graphics, also had selectable camera angles. You think that's not a big deal, but back in 1991, in racing games, that's a pretty big deal.
This is the first step up from the two bean cans connected with a string level of technology.
Right, exactly. So, of course, Virtua Racing, you look at it now, it looks kind of like Star Fox. It's a planetary level Star Fox. All the polygons are like garage shaded or basic shading. There's no texturing. So everything just looks very kind of angular and triangle-ish.
And your picture chief goes...
Not quite, but close. There actually was only a little bit of audio, little bit of voice in the game, unfortunately. Daytona was where they really implemented full-on voiceover like that. But Virtua Racing was originally designed as a tech demo, which were when they were showing off the features of the Model 1 arcade hardware. And this was the game that actually pioneered the full 8-player connected cabinet setup, and also had full hydraulic cockpits that moved around as you raced.
Fancy.
So like when you'd get in a wreck, the thing would just like jam to the side and lift up and do all sorts of shaking. It's kind of freaky, actually, when you're actually doing it. But
you
it's a
too
lot
can
of
break
fun.
your neck for just 25 cents.
Well, it doesn't hit that hard, but it definitely is kind of surprising at first. You're like, whoa, wow.
Man, do you remember when arcades were only 25 cents?
Yes, yes. I don't think this game was ever 25 cents.
Now, where does this fall in the timeline of arcades in general? Was this fairly early on when arcades were becoming a big thing? Or did this kind of revolutionize the market?
This was 1991, so it was about the time arcades were kind of beginning their, getting their second wind, I think. Because we had the popularity of arcades in the 80s, which kind of carried through in the early 80s. And I think that kind of carried through, but the popularity did start to wane a bit by the time we got to about 1990-ish, I think. Because we started being able to get most of the arcade experiences from earlier in the decade at home, thanks to the NES. And other consoles, but mostly the NES. So it wasn't until about this time where 3D graphics really started coming into the picture that arcades made that sort of leap forward again in popularity. And this was about the same time, well actually this was just before Street Fighter came in, and Street Fighter really revitalized the arcade scene. Between Street Fighter 2 and Daytona USA, I think those were the things that kept arcades going for the next half decade or so, really. In 1993, 2 years after Virtua Racing, we had Daytona USA. Daytona USA was another game developed by Sega AM2. It's a spiritual follow-up to Virtua Racing. It's basically the same gameplay, very much an arcade-style feel. It is in no way a representation of the actual act of stock car racing. It is basically drifting is the name of the game. And drifting is not a thing you do in real life in NASCAR or in any kind of stock car racing, really.
Give it time. I'm sure it'll be introduced somehow.
Could be, but I don't think so.
Just because they weigh like 2 pounds each and it would be exceedingly dangerous doesn't mean that it's off the table.
Sure. I mean, drift racing is a thing, but it's not a thing when it comes to stock cars. It's also not a thing when it comes to the open wheel IndyCar racing, which was what Virtua Racing originally was. So it's a spiritual follow-up to Virtua Racing, and used the Model 2 hardware. Now, the main difference between Model 1 and Model 2 was that the Model 2 was finally capable of actually having textures on polygons. So it could actually have graphics instead of just triangles.
So you can have what looks like a car instead of a lump.
Yes.
That's vaguely car-like.
Yes. Although, to be fair, Virtua Racing actually looks pretty decent. Especially for its time. I think it still looks pretty good. It's kind of stylized, actually. You could look at it as sort of a stylized game. But, of course, it popularized the 8-player format, and also had full cabinets that had hydraulic maneuvering. And, of course, the most legendary thing about the the original Daytona USA, the music. The music's kind of a love it or hate it affair, I think.
Oh, I love it.
I personally love it. I think it's fantastic.
I like music that is cheesy enough that it goes with a good wine.
And this definitely does. Daytona USA has music composed by Takanobu Mitsuyoshi. And the original arcade game, does not have fully performed vocals. It's actually the Model 2 hardware could only use samples, triggered short samples. So what Mitsuyoshi did was he recorded his own voice. He'd record each of the notes each time he would say A, E, A, E. He'd record that and then trigger it as the song was going along. So that's why it's like, so he'd go A, and then E, and then E, and then trigger that as the song was going along, so that way it would be, so that it wouldn't take up as much room, because it couldn't do a full-length vocal track. It would
That's ingenious, but it must have been tedious as hell to get recorded.
Yeah. So if you listen to the original song, which is Let's Go Away, it says Daytona, but you can clearly hear the points where it cuts, because you can hear day, and then toe, and then nah. So it's very much like, I think the A even, the ah at the end of Daytona is even like repeated over and over. You can kind of hear where it's cut, where it kind of cuts together. It's really fascinating if you sit there and listen to it and how it sounds, because it's really weird. It doesn't sound human, of course. And of course, it's a Japanese man with a very pronounced accent. So it doesn't sound human. It's really cool. And of course, as I mentioned, these
days are just spoiled, what with their full MP3, MP4 orchestral tracks and full voice dialogue and all that jazz.
Oh, yeah.
In our day, we had to record every individual syllable and hope to God it was on key.
And of course, like I mentioned earlier, it is one of the highest grossing arcade machines of all time. Extremely popular in the West, in the East, in Europe, everywhere. This freaking game was no slouch, man. It made a lot of money. I don't know how much money exactly it made. I don't have that in my notes. But it made a lot of money. It was personally very influential on me. I think I discovered it probably in like 1994 in the arcades and was hooked almost instantly. It helped that I was raised in a family who was really into racing, especially my father. My dad loves especially stock car racing, NASCAR racing. And Daytona USA was one of the few ways I get to really bond with him, because he's not much of a video gamer, but he's really into car racing. And I enjoy car racing. I enjoy cars, but I'm not nearly as much into cars as he is. But I do like video games. So Daytona was kind of one of the ways that I was able to, bond a little bit with my father. It sort of had that crossover and a common ground bit. So that's one reason why I love Daytona so much. And the other reason, of course, is the music and the white knuckle action, basically. Daytona is pretty much like the distillation of everything that's great about racing to me. You watch racing on TV, it's mostly pretty boring, and it's very long. Car races are not short. They take many hours, sometimes even up to 24. But this is sort of like taking everything that's exciting about racing, all of the crashes, all of the action of it all, and just sort of boiling it down and distilling it into what makes it so much fun.
It distills it down to the thing that really makes your heart race.
Oh! I see what you did there. That's smart. I like that.
And thanks to the new technology, you can see it from multiple angles.
Woo! Cameras. Yeah, it's kind of funny because the attract mode of the first Daytona actually advertised the fact that there were buttons on the cabinet that you could use to change the camera angle. I think Virtua Racing also had the same thing. It's pretty funny. It also taught you how to drift, which is a very important skill that you really need in Daytona. And you really should use manual transmission. You should use manual shifting. It makes drifting in the game so much easier and so much better. It's trickier. It makes it a lot trickier, but once you get it nailed down, it helps a lot.
Now, is it balanced so that it's an actual technique that allows you to race better, or is it sort of like Mario Kart DS, where once you know how to snake, you destroy the competition because you're basically abusing the system?
It actually helps you race better and go faster. One of the most legendary turns probably in racing games in general, the third turn at 3.7 Speedway, which is the easy course of Daytona USA. That final turn, if you can drift through it at 200 miles an hour instead of slowing down, you will shave like seconds off your lap times. It's insane the differences. So if you're using brakes instead of doing the shift technique, which I think is called 4-1-4, where you're in fourth gear, which is top gear, and then you shift into first for just a second. You just flick it into first and then flick it back into fourth and crank the wheel. And that'll get you around that corner and at 200 miles an hour, and you'll be super far ahead of everyone else.
I realize you're using the royal you, meaning anyone who can do this, but I can just imagine myself going flying off into a wall somewhere.
It is incredibly difficult. I do not profess to be a professional in any way at Daytona. I understand the concepts, but actually putting them into practice can be quite difficult. So Daytona is not an easy game to master. It's really easy to sit down and just start playing it. But to actually master it and get really good lap times is definitely very tricky, and that's another sort of thing that I like about it. It's challenging without being inapproachable. Now, moving on to the next game I want to talk about, which is not Daytona. We're going back to Virtua Racing real fast. I want to just mention this real quick because Virtua Racing and Daytona to me are kind of inextricably linked together to me. They're developed by the same team, and there's more than a couple times where they sort of lead into each other. So Virtua Racing was ported to the Sega Genesis in March of 1994, which is one of the last years of the Genesis, really. And it was the first and only Genesis game to use an expansion chip. Like the Super FX on the Super Nintendo, or all kinds of other chips that the Super Nintendo had. The Genesis never had any of those.
That's because it was powerful enough. It didn't need any help.
Yes. And actually, it really did. But yes, the Sega Virtua processor was the chip. The SVP chip was inside every cartridge of Virtua Racing. And it was intended to be used also to port Virtua Fighter, which was the follow-up to Virtua Racing. So this is the beginning. The Virtua Racing was the beginning of the whole Virtua series of Sega games, which Virtua has always been kind of a weird name to me, but whatever.
I don't know. It sounds a little cooler than just virtual.
Yeah.
Virtual racing sounds like, you're virtually racing.
Yeah.
Buzzword, virtual. But Virtua? I don't know, it's got that kind of almost Englishy zing to it.
Yeah, it gives it a little bit of a futuristic feel. This is supposed to be like, this is the future. This is the future of fighting games. This is the future of racing games. Which I think in the case of Virtua Racing was true. Virtua Fighter, kind of. Anyway, the Sega Genesis version of Virtua Racing runs at about 15 frames per second. 15!
Oh, wow.
Which is faster than Star Fox. But not,
really?
But not much. Yeah, it's faster than Star Fox.
Wow.
Yeah. Star Fox is very slow. It doesn't seem like it. Star Fox really compensates well with its design, but it's definitely a slow game. 15 frames per second is about half of the arcade version of Virtua Racing, but otherwise everything about it is intact. It is a very surprisingly faithful conversion. And it plays well, actually. It's a lot of fun, and there is zero slowdown.
That is really impressive, all things considered, taking something from an arcade cabinet and all the power they had compared to the old home consoles.
Yeah.
And if all you did is lose some of the frame rate, but it's steady.
Yeah, it's a very...
I don't know, that stands the test of time. That's really impressive.
Yeah, it's a very steady frame rate, and it plays well. And all the features are there. Everything's there. There's nothing missing. The one drawback to Virtua Racing on the Sega Genesis is that it's about $100 new when it came out.
Woo!
It's about double what a normal game was. It is the most expensive Sega Genesis game at retail price that was ever released. Now you can pick it up for about $1. Unfortunately, it's surprisingly not that rare for being a $100 game, and for being released pretty late in the Genesis lifespan. So The reason I'm talking about Virtua Racing on the Sega Genesis, though, is because Daytona USA was originally planned to be ported to the Sega Genesis using the SVP chip, but it was canceled because the Genesis was dying. And I'm trying to imagine how the music would have sounded on the Sega Genesis, because the Virtua Racing's music comes in very short snippets. It's like short jingles, about 11, 12 seconds long. And they're all instrumental. There's really no vocals or anything, aside from a few voice clips. Daytona's music is very vocal heavy. And it would have been interesting to hear how it would have sounded on the Genesis, because I doubt it would have sounded anything like the arcade.
I'm thinking something more akin to a kazoo.
Maybe. It might be instrumental, at least. So, of course, the Daytona USA version was canceled, or Daytona USA for the SVP on the Genesis was canceled, because less than a year later, the Sega Saturn came onto the scene. In April.
That triumphant console that won the war for everyone in a completely different reality.
Oh, it's sad. I like the Saturn. I like the Saturn a lot, but it's true. So anyway, Daytona USA, April 1995 for the Sega Saturn. It has all the same features as the arcade, but unfortunately, it is very, very, very cut back graphically. There is a lot of pop-in. Like, the track just materializes in front of you magically. And the frame rate doesn't do the gameplay any favors. One of the great draws of Daytona USA, it's multiplayer. Not present. There is no multiplayer whatsoever. This version
You're not selling me on this port here, Kyle.
This version of the game, unfortunately, is not great. And it's also the one I probably have some of the most time with, because it was brought to PC as well. I never owned a Saturn, sadly. But I did own this version on PC, and it was pretty much the same. The resolution was slightly higher on PC, I think. But other than that, it was exactly the same as the Saturn version. And, yeah, it was fine at the time, I think. It was just impressive to be bringing Daytona to a home console. But going back to it, it's playable, but it's not really all that fun. But the music was greatly improved. The music is actually full CD quality. Properly recorded versions with real instruments and full vocal performances.
Ooh.
So this is actually Mitsuyoshi getting on the mic himself and just belting out the great Daytona lyrics, which are more like vocal sounds rather than actual lyrics. But
it's more of a very, very fancy original soundtrack disc, is what you're saying.
Right? Yes. The great thing about that game, actually, the Saturn version and the PC version, is that you can pop it in a CD player and just play the music. And that's what I did a lot of the time, was just stream the music from the disc on a CD player. It was awesome. Now, following up on that, about a year and a half later or so, in November of 1996, we had Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition, or Circuit Edition. Yeah, it was a Circuit Edition in Japan, and Daytona USA Deluxe on the PC. This version of the game is basically an apology. It's like, yeah, It's sorry we released a really cut down and kind of crummy version of Daytona the first time around. Here's another version that's pretty much improved in every way. It has all the original tracks and a couple of new ones. There's a whole bunch of selectable cars for the first time in the series. You don't have to just play as the Hornet. It is a bunch of different cars you can choose from, and I think each one of them had a little bit of a different handling and speed and everything. And of course, the music was changed up considerably. A lot of the music was switched out to become instrumental, but there were a couple of new songs, and this was the first and only time that Jun Senoue was involved with the Daytona USA series. This game, to be honest, for me, this game is where Sonic vocal tracks were originally conceived. This is where Sonic vocal tracks come from. If you want to trace the lineage of Crush 40, it's pretty much this game.
This is where it all begins.
Yes.
This is where it buds and begins to take form into something glorious.
Indeed. There were 2 songs on the soundtrack that were collaborations with Jun Senoue and Eric Martin of Mr. Big. The other thing Eric Martin is known for is performing the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers theme song for the first Power Rangers movie.
And if that doesn't sell you on it, nothing will.
Yeah, pretty much.
If you don't like that, get out of my house.
Pretty much. I love Eric Martin, actually. He's a really great vocalist. It would not be the first time the 2 of them collaborated, by the way, but that's a story for another day. So we have 2 songs from those 2. And you listen to them, they're very much similar to what would become the soundtrack for NASCAR Arcade, which was pretty much all Crush 40. And the soundtrack for NASCAR Arcade is Crush 40's self-titled album, by the way, in case anyone was curious about why there are so many songs about cars and racing on Crush 40's first album. That's why.
It's a good album. I like that album.
Yes, it's very good. And the last fact I will add about Daytona USA CCE is that the Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition Netlink Edition is the rarest Sega Saturn game in North America. And the prices are extraordinarily high on the secondary market. So eBay, stuff like that. The last copy of Daytona USA Netlink Edition went for $1,300.
Good night.
As is what I checked out. Yeah, it's completely pointless, too, because there's no way to play it, because the servers are gone.
It's not about playing it, it's about having it.
It's about having it. Yes, I understand how collecting works. But come on. Come on. What I do like about...
mine.
What I do like
about...
What I do like about...
Daytona.
Yes. What I do like about the... soundtrack, the cover art for the soundtrack of Championship Circuit Edition in Japan, actually has a picture of Eric Martin on it and says featuring vocals by Eric Martin.
Nice.
Because Mr. Big, the band Mr. Big in Japan is absolutely enormous. Like nobody in the US hardly remembers them except for maybe about one song. They were a one-hit wonder in the US. But in Japan, they were massive. It's pretty crazy. So it's a big selling point. I should say it is finally Daytona USA returned to the arcades in 1998. But this is not the final time we're talking about Daytona. But this is Daytona USA 2 Battle on the Edge. Released for the Model 3 in June of 1998. Now the interesting thing is... This version of Daytona is completely different from the original. All new tracks, all new cars, all new music, everything is brand new. And it actually was not the first game to use the Sega Model 3. It has a brand new soundtrack, as I mentioned, which is a lot more Sonic vocal tracks-esque, which means I love it. It's not Jun Senoue, it's Dennis St. James doing the vocals, and I think some members of the 80s hair metal band Winger doing the music, doing the guitars, and it's pretty freaking great. But Dennis St. James, people might know, he did the English version of Angels with Burning Hearts for Burning Rangers on the Sega Saturn, which also had a version sung by Takanobu Mitsuyoshi. And all of the music in Daytona USA 2 also has a Mitsuyoshi version. So if you want your classic Daytona vocals, you do have an option in Daytona 2. Daytona USA 2 is probably my favorite game in the series, just because it improved on so many things. The driving physics are greatly improved. The graphics still look great. It's weirdly realistic looking. It looks realistic, but it's still kind of stylized in that weird Sega way. That's just kind of how Sega rolled. This version, the first version of Daytona USA, there was a revision that I'm going to be talking about in a second. But the first version of Daytona has the easy course. It's a track that takes place in a giant greenhouse.
Oh, neat.
Which is really cool looking. It's basically you have a huge dome overhead, and there's just lots of greenery and shrubbery everywhere. And after the second turn, as you're going down the back straight there, it's basically the same shape as the original easy course from the first Daytona 3.7 Speedway, but it's the whole theme of it is very different. And as you're going down that back straight, it takes place between these two super tall canyons, which is kind of weird when you think about it, because this is indoors. This whole track is indoors, and this is not even like feasible in real life, but it looks so believable and so cool that I love it. So in late 1998, I don't have an exact date on this, there's never really is, Daytona USA 2 Power Edition comes out, which drops the awesome subtitle. I love the subtitle Battle on the Edge, but...
I mean, you can't really top that, so you might as well just move on.
Yeah, Power Edition. Power Edition is not as cool, but it's still all right. Unfortunately, it completely gets rid of the Forest Dome, which is that greenhouse track, and swaps it out for the more generic Sega International Raceway. It's very much a standard NASCAR-style track. It doesn't even have a fun gambling theme like the original 3.7 Speedway does. It's just... Yeah, it's really kind of disappointing in that way. It just completely removes it. But it does add back in the Hornet for the first time since Championship Circuit Edition. You can play as the Hornet, and it actually has a pretty good approximation of the original handling from the first game. So if you missed the way the cars felt in the first Daytona, you're in for a treat, because the Hornet in Daytona USA 2 handles pretty much the same. And the last feature added was a special challenge course, which combined all three of the tracks into one big one.
Oh, geez.
So what happens is you would do most of a lap of the advanced course, and then it would suddenly veer off to the side, and you'd go through a big tunnel that would suddenly eject you into the expert course, which is sort of a recreation of New York City as you're racing around New York in through the streets, which is not something that happens in real life in stock car racing. So it's actually kind of neat. And then finally, once you finish up there, it sends you through another tunnel, and then you head out of that tunnel and do one more lap of the easy course. So remember that one, though, because we'll be coming back to it in a little bit. So after Daytona USA 2, a lot of people were expecting the game to come to the Dreamcast. It never did. Unfortunately, Daytona USA 2 was never released on a home console. But in 2001, we had Daytona USA for the Dreamcast, or Daytona USA 2001 as it was called in Europe. It's a completely new recode, ground-up rework of the original game, with a bunch of new tracks added, all new cars, really nice graphics. It's a really good-looking Dreamcast game.
All the Dreamcast games were gorgeous.
They actually, a lot of them really were. The Dreamcast still looks really good, especially if you get a VGA box or a VGA cable for it.
And that's why it won the console wars in another completely different reality.
Yes, of course. So, this was the second game in the series to have online multiplayer. Over a 56K modem, which sounds like a nightmare.
That was high-class stuff back in the day, let me tell you what.
Yeah, I know, but it still sounds like a nightmare. For a racing game, especially. It does not sound fun. And it had a couple of the tracks taken from All 3 of the original tracks, of course. A couple of the tracks taken from Daytona Championship Circuit Edition, and 3 new ones, which are kind of neat, but they lack a little bit of the flavor of the first 2 games, which kind of makes me sad. They're pretty cool, but they're not nearly as cool as the originals, I'd say. There's a whole new selection of cars, most of which are unlockable in online mode, which means they are no longer unlockable. Because there are no servers and there's no way to play Daytona USA online on the Dreamcast. So, thanks, Sega! Now, that's not discounting that you could just download a save game and transfer it to your Dreamcast through various methods, to your Dreamcast memory card through various methods, but through normal gameplay, there's no way to unlock, 2 or 3 of the cars, which is unfortunate. With a controller, the game is very tough to play because the handling is kind of twitchy and pretty difficult. And overall, I like it. It's a fun game, but it's not what I was hoping for. I really wanted Daytona 2 to come home, but it never did, and it makes me sad. And after that, unfortunately, the series went dormant for a good while. Until, about 8 years later in the arcades, suddenly, something new and magical appeared. A little game a little nondescript game with a completely nondescript title called Sega Racing Classic came out in 2009. Now, Sega Racing Classic, it's a remake of Daytona. It's literally just straight up Daytona. The first game, the first arcade game, just in 720p. It's in wide.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right, it's widescreen. That's all. That's the only new feature it has. It's in widescreen. That's all it is. Now, I do like the cabinet design for Sega Racing Classic. It looks great, but you can't immediately tell that it's Daytona because it doesn't say Daytona anywhere on it. Now, why is that? Well, Daytona USA is a licensed property. The name is licensed from Daytona International Speedway, the International Speedway Corporation. And Sega hadn't had the license for quite a while. And they actually never really took advantage of it because they never actually put Daytona in the game. They just used the name. They never put Daytona International Speedway in the game. So, it's a good marketing move, actually, because NASCAR is hugely popular. But it had nothing to do with Daytona or NASCAR or anything otherwise, other than being a stock car racing game with the name Daytona. So, but Sega had lost the license since 2001, so they ended up releasing Sega Racing Classic for the ring-wide arcade system, which I don't understand the name ring-wide. I don't know what that means, but that's okay. Sega had some really weird hardware names, like the Dreamcast and the hardware. The Dreamcast and the arcade hardware from about that time was called Naomi, which doesn't make any sense. I'm sure there's a reason why it's called Naomi. I just don't know why.
I mean, Dreamcast itself is kind of a weird name, so just...
This is true.
Don't question it, just run with it.
It's true.
I'll take a weird name over something like Xbox.
Yeah, Xbox is kind of a weird name until you realize why it's called that. But anyway, That's a story for another time. So, after that... We fast forward a couple of years, and suddenly, out of nowhere, Sega announces that a port of Daytona USA will be coming to Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network in October of 2011. Woohoo! Now, this is pretty much just a straight-up port of Sega Racing Classic with the license restored. So, it's Daytona, it's Sega Racing Classic with the Daytona license back in it. It does have online multiplayer, which is a really nice feature, and you can actually still play it online. It also has a karaoke mode, which is fantastic.
Oh, wow.
All it is you just... It's the same gameplay as normal. You're in time trial mode, but there's no time. You can't actually see a time. There's nothing on the screen except the lyrics to the songs. So you choose a track, and then... you hop in and you just drive along and the lyrics scroll along the bottom. So you just sing along.
That's not just karaoke. That's the equivalent of popping in your favorite CD, getting in the car with a couple of your buddies, and just go cruising.
Pretty much, yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. There is a hilarious video of Mitsuyoshi, Takanobu Mitsuyoshi, the original composer, actually playing the game and singing along. It was one of the promotional videos for the release of the game. You got to look it up because it's hilarious and it is awesome. He gets so freaking into it, which is really funny because he's also trying to be quiet at the same time. So he's sitting there dancing along, trying to be quiet. He's like whispering, but really getting into it. He's dancing along. Oh man, it's freaking great. I love it. And there's also the only other feature added was a special challenge mode. So there were different challenges that you could do to unlock not really anything other than achievements, I think, but with special time trials. So like take this turn faster than like 190 miles an hour or something like that, which is extremely fast, by the way.
It sounds like it, yes.
Yes. And unfortunately, that's the last we've heard of the Daytona series. That's the last game released. And it's a great port. I really enjoy that port a lot. Still not Daytona 2, but... What's that?
Well, it's considering how it seems to kind of ebb and flow, come and go. It's about time for a resurgence, so who knows?
I think it is. We've had a couple of appearances at Daytona since 2011, and I'm going to get into those real quick here. First one I wanted to mention some other appearances of Daytona references. Fighters Megamix for the Sega Saturn. I don't have a date on it. I'm sure there's a release date. I just didn't have the time to look it up. Fighters Megamix was a big crossover game with several of Sega's big fighting franchises at the time, which I think was, other than Virtua Fighter, I think was also Fighting Vipers. It was a collaboration of... Or not a collaboration, but a crossover between Virtua Fighter 2 and Fighting Vipers. Also features Janet from Virtua Cop 2 and the Hornet from Daytona USA. The car, Ian.
Yeah, about that.
Have you seen this? You've seen this, right?
It's a car. Does it drive around and just, like, do donuts, or...
No, it's a car that stands like a person. It stands on its back wheels.
I see.
And uses its front wheels to punch.
I see.
Yes. It stands up on its two wheels. And I think it does have a move where it sort of gets on all four wheels and drives into the other person. But it's weird.
I need this in my life. Where can I procure this?
It's for the Sega Saturn. It's only ever been for the Sega Saturn.
Of course it is.
I think this was also... Yeah, this is also another... Might be the first appearance? No. It's probably... I think it might have came after. But Bark and Bean are also in this game.
Right! One of their last hurrahs.
Yes. Was this the last time they appeared or no? Was it... I can't remember if this was before Sonic the Fighters or after.
It was after Sonic the Fighters, because they were more of a cameo appearance in that, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And beyond that, the only other appearance they've had is as the wanted posters in Sonic Generations.
Ah.
Beyond that, there's been nothing that I know of.
Okay. Yeah, so this would be the last appearance of those two, and the only appearance of the Hornet in a game other than a racing game, which is weird. It also uses a lot of the sound effects from Daytona, and there is a fighting level in that takes place in 3.7 Speedway. It's a ring set up in the infield, and you can see the track in the background with the cars going around it as you're fighting. And it uses the classic music, of course.
Nice.
Yes. So, that happened. That was a thing that happened. Fast forward to 2004, we had Outrun 2 for the Xbox. This was the sequel to Outrun, which had not had a sequel since like 1986, which hadn't had a Well, it had other games in the series, but it hadn't had a proper sequel since the original in 1986.
That somehow makes it funnier.
Yeah, I know. It's really weird how they would, we had Outrun, we had Turbo Outrun, we had Outrunners, and then the series went dormant for forever, and then all of a sudden in 2004, Outrun 2. So, but Outrun 2 for the Xbox was the only home appearance of anything from Daytona USA 2. The challenge course, the one I described earlier, which was the combined 3-track version, that makes an appearance in this game as a bonus unlockable. And I think the Xbox version was the only one to get that bonus. So, kind of sad, but the only way to play Daytona 2 at home outside of Model 3 emulation, which is apparently real now, is to play Outrun 2. Fast forward to 2012. Ridge Racer for the PlayStation Vita. Ridge Racer.
I still can't get over that old meme. It's Ridge Racer!
You know what he's referring to, right? When he does that? When he did that? When Kazurai did that?
No, I was just mostly laughing with everyone else. I was still
yeah. Of course. But that's actually the call out on the title screen of the original Ridge Racer.
Oh, there we go then.
It goes, Ridge Racer! He's actually quoting the game, which makes it even more funny. So anyway, Ridge Racer for the PlayStation Vita, released in 2012. Apparently not a great game, I haven't played it. But Ridge Racer and Daytona were kind of contemporary rivals. There was a lot of hot racing games going on back in the early 90s, and Ridge Racer and Daytona were going at it. Ridge Racer was the biggest rival to Daytona in the arcades. And for some reason, out of nowhere in 2012, for a console hardly anybody owns, and for a game that apparently isn't that great, there was special DLC released that featured the original version, complete with low polygons, of the Hornet, a Hornet car from the original Daytona, and a remix of the Ridge Racer theme song with vocals by Takanobu Mitsuyoshi. So it goes...
That's just weird.
Yeah, it's really weird. The song is called Ridge Racer USA Mix, and the lyrics are outstanding.
Well, I would expect nothing less.
I would quote it for you, but it's really something you need to experience for yourself. It does in fact have the do. That is there. Sadly, it does not. It is not followed up by Ridge Racer. Let's drift away. It's not followed up by that, but it's close. But it's great. I love it. And then finally, the most recent appearance of Daytona anything, as far as I'm aware. Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transform in November 2012. My favorite car, my favorite racer actually, Ages, which of course is Sega backwards, is an unlockable racer in Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed. That its car mode is the Hornet from Daytona. And its voice clips are the crew chief voiceovers from the original arcade game. And it's fantastic. It's by far my favorite thing about that game. The other great thing... What's up? What's up?
That's one of the reasons why I enjoy Sega and All-Stars Racing, both versions, is that it somehow has a more poignant sense of nostalgia, since so many of these franchises didn't take off or have languished for so long, that when they showed that much attention to detail and love for each and every one of them, was like, yeah, why haven't we gotten a new one yet?
Yeah, exactly. The other great thing about Ages is that its flying mode is the F-14 from Afterburner, which is another one of my favorite Sega arcade games. And the boat mode, the water mode, is a Dreamcast controller.
Oh yeah, I'd forgotten that.
A Dreamcast controller-shaped boat. I love it. It's a speedboat that's shaped like a Dreamcast controller. It's my favorite thing ever. It's freaking great. And when you crash, it makes grinding noises and goes beep.
That's right. Oh, wow.
It's so delightful. I love it. It's my favorite thing. And that's Daytona USA. So that's the rundown of the series. And I hope I've expressed my love for it, because I don't know if I could do it any other way. But I love it, you know? It's fun.
I think I can tell. I think we can all tell.
I hope so. So anyway, that was my hostile takeover of the BumbleKast. Hope you guys enjoyed it.
So we're going to shift gears.
Nice.
And move on to the Q&A. Now, do you want to have your questions answered on the show? Either email us at bumblecast@yahoo.com, tweet to us at IanFlynnBKC or KyleJCRB with the hashtag BumbleKast, or be a patron on Patreon and just ask there. Patrons of the BumbleKast get their questions put into the priority Q&A, where we answer them first. Everyone else, you have to get in line.
Indeed.
So we're going to start off with some priority Q&A.
Yeah.
Yams88 asks, is there anything you would have wanted to incorporate into the Sonic Boom comic if you'd been given more time to work on it? Personally, I would have loved to see something fun like Metal and Shadow fighting off Sonic together. And a series meant to be different, why not go all out with it, right? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, back in 1972, when I first created Sonic the Hedgehog, I invented...
Whoa. What the heck was that?
That was weird. Man, what happened?
Sorry, kind of blanked out for a second.
Weird.
We were doing the priority Q&A?
Yeah.
Okay, go on. First question?
Yeah. Okay. From Yams88, is there anything you would have wanted to incorporate into the Sonic Boom comic if you'd been given more time to work on it? Personally, I would have loved to see something fun like Metal and Shadow fighting off Sonic together. If the series is meant to be different, why not go all out with it, right? What are your thoughts on this?
The difference in Sonic Boom wasn't so much the content so much as the way it was delivered. It was definitely more of the light comedy versus the story-driven in the main books. I definitely had scripts queued up that I wanted to do and wanted to pitch, but I didn't feel like I was really robbed of the chance of doing anything, so to speak. There was also the matter of it being so closely tied to an active TV series in the games that there were some tighter restrictions on what we could use, so I'm not entirely sure if we could have had Shadow and Metal Sonic show up. I honestly don't know. We never got far enough to pitch anything like that. Now, I'm going to take over for once, because there's a question for you, Kyle.
Okay, go ahead.
Zephyr Flame asks, was there a part of your life where you weren't interested in music, or was it some sort of event that triggered your love for it? How young were you when you first started?
To be honest, I don't remember. As far as I know, I've always enjoyed music on some level. I grew up listening to radio a lot, and at the time I was growing up, my parents were listening to a lot of country music radio.
I'm so sorry.
So I have a vague appreciation for, like, late 80s, early 90s country music.
I'm so very sorry.
Yeah, looking back on it, most of it wasn't that great, but there's a few hidden gems here and there. Otherwise, a lot of it was video game music. Super Mario Brothers is pretty much ingrained into my head for the rest of my life. I don't think it will ever leave musically.
No.
It was the very first game I ever played, and the music left a pretty big impression on me. And since then, I've always just kind of enjoyed the music in games. I remember doing stuff like holding a tape recorder up to a TV to record music and listen to it later, or popping the CD for the PC version of Daytona USA into a CD player and listening to it that way.
Nice.
So, as far as I know, all my life, music has just been something I've enjoyed. I've had thoughts of making music for sure. I played trumpet for a little while in 3rd grade. and then discovered that actually reading music is really difficult, so I kind of gave up. And I've dabbled some in playing guitar in high school, not for any reason other than just I wanted to learn how to play guitar. I just wanted to make music, but unfortunately, those things didn't really go very far for me, but I've always at least enjoyed listening to music, and the making of music is fascinating to me. The process of it, even if I'm not very technically minded, is interesting to me. So, and we have one for you, Ian. Real quick question here. What do Chao taste like?
You ever have one of those, like, blue Freezy Pops?
Yeah.
Think of that, only a very watery Jell-O.
Okay, so like a blue...
Or pudding.
Like a blue Gatorade?
Kind of like a blue Gatorade, but if you turned that into a pudding.
Okay. That sounds delicious. I'm into that. I'm gonna go hunt me some Chao. And I like how they're called Chao, so like it's like they're already food.
Exactly, just chow down.
Exactly. Very nice. All right, and our last priority Q&A question comes from Michael B. How did the Freedom Fighters, in particular Sally and Rotor, learn to ride extreme gear? I just keep thinking that it's rather unusual given the general consensus that Sally isn't as graceful as she was pre-reboot. So it must have taken her a bit of time to get used to keeping that board straight in the air.
I'm gonna raise a big question mark over the general consensus that she's not as graceful as she used to be.
Yeah, I've not gotten that indication at all.
That's a new one to me.
Yeah.
And it's not like we've written her any less graceful. I mean, I haven't had any moments where she's used some special super secret back kick that only works on one person, but she's been flipping around and, stabitizing things with the best of them, so I consider her the same agility as before.
Is it just because she's less princessy, I guess? Maybe?
Maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, that's weird. Anyway.
But in terms of learning to ride an airboard, I imagine that within the Sonic world, it's comparable to learning to surf or ride a skateboard, in that an actual airboard in real-world physics would be nigh impossible, 1, to work, and B, to ride.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's 1, to work, and B, to ride.
Sure. I never would have caught that. That's very good. I like it. Anyway, carry on. Continue.
And given that all these characters are exceptionally gifted physically, that it's not really that big of a stretch that they can all ride them. If that doesn't satisfy you, say that Tails modified everyone else's extreme gear to be more trainee wheels happy.
Sure.
As for Rotor, he basically has the same body type as Storm. So if Storm can ride one, Rotor can ride one.
Right. Rotor is not like he was pre-reboot. To me.
He's still chunky, it's just a little...
Well, he's muscular, he's beefy, he's more realistic, I guess? Because, walruses are pretty strong.
Oh, they're monstrous creatures.
Yes. So, it makes sense. Alright, that's going to do it for the priority Q&A, and let's shift on over to the standard Q&A. This one comes from LordLaharlsVassal. Sonic comic question. After reading the Razor origin in Sonic Super Digest number 15, I got the distinct impression that Razor and Coral are supposed to have a crush on each other. An impression I did not get from the Waves of Changes arc. What is the authorial intent?
Well, something to keep in mind with Waves of Change is that they weren't really in any situation where lovey-dovey expressions of affection would really fit, now would they?
Right. Just because the characters like each other doesn't mean they like each other all the time.
And something else to consider is that was their introductory story arc, so anything that would come afterwards would be character development.
Mm-hmm.
If there's any doubt left in anyone's mind, we will be addressing that in part in an upcoming arc that I will not go into detail with because that's spoiler territory.
Oh, yes. And also it means you wouldn't have to buy the issue, and we can't have that now, can we?
No, absolutely not.
No. Unknown Shadow 675 asks, as you brought in the character Miss Y from Hideki Ishikawa's Capcom art piece, was W. Waltz in the possible future of the Mega Man comic?
Yes and no. Yes, in that I very much wanted to bring her in. I had a very dedicated idea on how I wanted to characterize her and utilize her. No, in that in the initial pitches we had to have her included, she was supposed to show up in Mega Man number 54, but we were met with resistance.
Yes.
Now, just like with anything in the Sonic books and Sega, what is a no today could be a yes tomorrow.
Yeah.
And the other way around. So, if and when Mega Man ever got its feet underneath it again, there would definitely be a possibility of Waltz showing up. I definitely want her in the book because I think she could be really cool.
Yeah, she would be awesome.
But it boils down to a maybe on all fronts. So, I'm thinking about her at least.
Yeah. I mean, you could always do what you did with Vesper Woman and just make up a very similar version.
True.
Is a in everything except name clone. Anyway, last question comes from Eranos1. With issue 280 now out, I might as well ask, which parents of the freedom fighters have died and which ones are still alive?
Confirmed so far in the book, Sally's father is still alive, mother is not. Rotor's father is still alive, unfortunately. Mother is not, also unfortunately. Antoine parents, they're gone. And as for Bunny...
Parents are brutally murdered. They're dead.
Really?
Yes.
By who?
I don't know.
You write it, not me. So
yeah.
I guess we'll figure it out.
It's weird. But yeah, I mean, I made it up. It's fine. I mean, I did come up with Sonic in 1962, so... Right. Yes. There's no discrepancy between dates, by the way. None whatsoever.
You're on top of this kind of thing.
Right. So, yes.
I mean, that's why we've got the show for you.
Yes. That's going to do it for this edition of the BumbleKast and this edition of the Q&A and BumbleKast. Hope you guys have enjoyed the show. And don't forget to ask us questions at BumbleKast@yahoo.com or patreon.com/BumbleKast, where you can also show your support for the show. Is there anything I'm leaving out, Ian? Anything we need to add before we get into our last plugs and close out the show?
I think that's it.
All right, then. Well, you can find what I'm doing over on Twitter at KyleJCRB or at kngi.org, where you can find archived episodes of this show and many others. And you can also catch me at 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Saturday over at the 8BitX Radio Network at 8bitx.com, where I am spinning video game music and video game music remixes for a couple hours every Saturday.
And you can find what I'm doing at bumbleking.com, which has got my entire portfolio and all that happy jazz. You can also follow me at Ian Flynn BKC on Twitter, which, again, I'm going to try to actually do stuff with every week.
Very nice. And you're also blogging now on bumbleking.com, right?
I'm going to try to. Thursday Thoughts will hopefully be a weekly thing.
Excellent. And before we head off, we got to give a shout out to our wonderful patrons over at patreon.com/BumbleKast. Shout outs to Daniel H., Zephyr Flame, Isai C., Deus M., Yams88, Mike B., Fancy Fool, Connell T., Daniel L., Samuel P., Justin G., Jennifer R., S. Yaridovich 9X, Alex P., and James K. That's going to do it for this edition of the BumbleKast. Hope you guys enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome back to the BumbleKast. I'm your host, Kyle Kraus, and joining me as always is the... You know what? I had something, and then I lost it! I had it, and then I lost it!
Chief to my pit crew?
No, actually, it was something not related at all to the topic. Okay. I got it again.
Hey, thanks for listening to the BumbleKast. If you like the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button and consider supporting us on Patreon. We have some great rewards as well as big plans to make the show even better. Also, rate and review the show on iTunes. it gets more folks listening and really helps us out. So we definitely appreciate it.
Original music by Ken Coda Snyder, used with permission. Find more of his music at bc.s3m.us and find the theme song at noisechanradio.bandcamp.com. Available as a pay what you want download.
See you later.
It's terrible, dude. That's so bad. Holy crap. Now I know how I sound.
No, I was trying to be as creepy as possible.
That was worse than me, I think. I'm pretty bad, but man, that was really bad.
Would it be too
Come on,
much?
I haven't done that. I haven't really done that way in a little while, at least. But you know, it is a good approximation. I'll give you that.